Okay, so with these chapter 12 notes, we're going to try something just a little bit different. Okay, you're not going to have to write the notes. Technically, you have the notes. For chapter 12, you should actually have paper versions of them, and hopefully, we'll be able to do paper versions for quite some time. If not, there is an electronic version on Schoology that you can manipulate as you watch this. And hopefully, we're going to be able to do this from now on. If we have to come up with a different way to do it, we'll come up with a different way to do it. It's not really that big of a deal. So, with the notes, you have the biggest part of the notes taken care of. They're already written or they're already typed out for you rather. However, there's some things that we need to emphasize. So there's going to be some need to highlight, and there's also going to need to be some notes that will have to be added along with the notes that are already on your page. And I'll try to fit them over here in the margins. I'm going to type them because you've seen my handwriting on this thing, and I'm going to try to get them as close to where they belong as possible. You might have to draw some arrows because of space, but try to figure out what works best for you. If you want to type them on electronic version, if you want to write them on a paper version, it doesn't really matter as long as you go ahead and you have them. The other thing that I've done just to kind of make this easier and kind of break it down into more manageable parts is that I have separated this kind of into sections. So I have pretty much broken it up along the lines of what we're going to be reading. And that's broken up along with the Roman numerals. So kind of pay attention to what the topic is, and those will be in the notes. And I'll try to make sure I let you know like what note section. But I've broken like chapter 12 down into, I think, 5 different note sets for each of the sections of chapter 12 that we're going to be dealing with. So to start with here, we have a couple things we need to highlight. We have a couple things that we need to add here. The first thing that we want to highlight, and we'll kind of do this in hunks and chunks, is we have to deal with Columbus's legacy. And it really has been subject to a lot of debate, especially currently. Is he the founder of the New World or is he the destroyer of the New World? So, because of this, his reputation as a heroic discoverer has definitely been challenged. Because let's face it, the emphasis has really been placed upon the history of death, slavery, racism, and exploitation that follows his voyage. Without Columbus coming to the New World, these aren't necessarily kind of a thing. That, the explorations, and we'll deal with this starting in chapter 13 and also in chapter 14, is that the Europeans are amazingly harsh and exploitative of the New World. They're completely indifferent to everyone except for themselves and will rape, pillage, and do horrible things as a consequence of that. Even though Columbus's voyage is arguably the most important single event of the 15th century, we have a lot of other things going on across the globe at the same time. I mean, Columbus is very much a turning point for the Europeans. But he's not the only game in town. And in fact, it will be the Europeans that are actually going to be playing catch up for quite some time. So next to B, I'm going to have you put a note down because it's one of those things that the author of the textbook really kind of doesn't concentrate on. And in fact, that's where a lot of these notes are going to be coming from. So just a heads up. So you want to put down next to B the following thing I'm going to type in there. So just give me a sec. So put down that the 15th century was a period of substantial diversity. And in fact, up towards the top of the page, I want to give you an idea of exactly how diverse the 15th century was. In fact, in the 15th century, it contains various types of societies, to be specific, 5. And up at the corner, up at the top of the page, you want to put this down. that it contains bands of hunters and gatherers. Those guys are the foragers that still haven't turned to into being farmers. We also have villages of agricultural people. We're going to have small states. We're going to have nomadic slash pastoral communities. And we also have the big boys. We have some of the established civilizations and empires. Now, the thing is, and we'll get to this here in the next page, is the 15th century is kind of like the last time we have everybody at the party. From the 15th century on, you're going to start to see that some of these people, like the bands of hunters and gatherers, the nomadic slash pastoral communities, and then eventually everybody else, are going to start to become absorbed by especially small states. But really, the established civilizations and empires are going to start to really rule the day here. What I want to do for the rest of this section's notes is kind of touch on each of those types of societies that are within the 15th century. So just to kind of reiterate, you want to make sure you highlight what I highlight, and I'll tell you where to put the notes or show you where to put the notes in. In the 15th century, the world still had all types of societies, again, like I said before, from the bands of gatherers and hunters to empire. But the balance of them, or rather between them, was different than what it had been in 500. In 500, there was definitely more hunters and gatherers and fewer empires. Well, now, starting in the 15th century, we've had a lot of changes. And now, starting in the 15th century, the balance is going to almost completely and totally flip, where very quickly the empires, like I said before, are really going to rule the roost, where the hunters and gatherers are going to end up being ruled here as well. So, the first group that we're going to talk about is a Paleolithic persistence. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the areas of Australia and North America. So, gathering and hunting societies or Paleolithic people still exist throughout all of Australia, much of Siberia, the Arctic coastlines, and parts of Africa and the Americas. Now, the thing here these Paleolithic people, with these Paleolithic people, it's important to note that they are not relics of the past, that they had changed over time, just more slowly. It's not that these guys are stuck in some type of a time warp. Instead, they just continue to, like, for example, hunt and gather. They are improving their techniques so they continue to support themselves. So we do see some type of evolution. They just haven't made the jump or haven't been able to make the jump to agriculture for a variety of reasons. Now, most of these places will eventually become farmers, and fewer hunters and gatherers will exist there, mainly because you're going to have farmers coming into these areas, conquering, taking over the land, and then forcibly turning these hunters and gatherers into farmers. It's also important to note that they had changed over time. They interacted with their neighbors. It's one of the reasons for the change, because neighbors, whether they're some of the village societies or whether they're some of the nomadic pastoral people, there will be an exchange of knowledge going on here. It is also important to note, and you want to put this over just somewhere on the side of this section, that hunters and gatherers still had a sizable and variable presence in the world of the 15th century, though history largely ignores them after the age of agriculture. We have hunting and gathering groups in the Americas. We'll talk about them in another section. We have hunters and gathering groups in Australia. And these guys are really quite substantial. But the catch here is that historians and archaeologists, we tend to kind of like brand new things. So as soon as agriculture pops up, all of a sudden we kind of ignore the hunters and gatherers because the agriculture and agriculturalists are, new, bright, shiny things. We'll do the exact same things with agriculture and farming once industry and the Industrial Revolution takes place. There's always this desire to concentrate on the new, and the old kind of is ignored. And that's what, sometimes a little bit is going on here with the hunters and gatherers. The next set of societies are the agricultural village societies, and the two big ones here are going to be the Igbo in Africa and also the Iroquois. These two will be made marginal by historians because, again, as soon as something big and awesome comes up, then the historians and the archaeologists are concentrating on them. So, as soon as the agricultural village societies are kind of like an old trick and there's something else new, again, historians kind of don't really concentrate on them quite as much. Where we tend to find these agricultural village societies is they're going to promenate or predominate much of North America, parts of the Amazon River Basin, Southeast Asia, and Africa south of the equator. Basically, we're looking at anywhere where farming is going to take place. So we need good soil and we need water. And if you notice that some of these places are directly by sources of water. Their societies are going to mostly avoid oppressive authority, class inequalities, and exclusion of women, typical of other civilization. And there's a key reason for this. This is because everyone's labor is needed. This is one of the things we talked about a little while ago with the gender inequalities. As long as everyone's labor is required to sustain the family, there tends not to be the difference between the sexes as much. We have an example of this type of society in the forested region of present-day southern Nigeria, where here by the 15th century, the Yoruba and Benin people had begun to develop small states and also urban centers. It is important to note, and you want to put over on the side there, that in Africa, these types of societies, these agricultural village societies, were not isolated. They had contact with one another. In fact, they have a very, very thriving regional trade going on within the various parts of Africa. For example, the Yoruba, Beni, and Igbo people are going to trade amongst themselves and also beyond their immediate region as well. We also have another example of these agricultural village societies in what is now central New York State. We have agricultural village societies going over or undergoing substantial change well before the 1500s, where the Iroquois speakers had become fully agricultural, mainly maize and beans, by around 1300. The population has grown, and we see the emergence of some very distinct peoples. The unique thing here that also is happening is that we're having a much of warfare that actually is creating something known as the Iroquois Confederation. And next to that D underneath number 4, you want to put a little star by that because that is definitely something that we'll touch on a little bit later on. So, the last types of human society that we're going to see in the 15th century, and again, they're also going to be one of the groups that isn't going to last in any type of substantial way outside of the 15th century, are going to be those pastoral or those nomadic people. And a group that you're going to hear mention for the next couple chapters, kind of on and off, are going to be the Mongolians. And here, round about 1400, we have a Turkic warrior by the name of Timur who tries to restore the Mongol Empire around about 1400. His army is going to devastate Russia, Persia, and India. In fact, every single time we talk about these guys over the next couple chapters, the Mongolians are going to be in. Um, and even his successors are going to keep control of the area between Persia and Afghanistan for more than a century. So even though these pastoral people are kind of starting to be phased out, they still are going to be an important part of the story for much of Eurasia for the next, little bit of time. It is important to note that nomads like the Mongols are still impacting civilizations well into the 1500s. We're going to be talking about a variety of regions throughout continental Asia and even into Eastern Europe where the Mongols or their descendants or some other nomadic group is going to have some push on these guys' stories. Now, even though they are definitely known for their warlike, it also is important to get down that they made up a very sophisticated society. These guys aren't just, these bloodthirsty, horrible human beings raping and pillaging, but there is a substantial and important and impressive hierarchy going on here as well. In the following centuries, we have in the steppe nomads' homeland, eventually is going to be swallowed up by the Russian and Chinese empires. So some of these nomads that are roaming Central Asia will be gobbled up either in the east by the Chinese or in the west by the Russians. Although there is something unique in the fact that African pastoralists are going to remain independent from established empires for several centuries longer. These guys actually are not taken until the late 19th century. They eventually will be taken by predominantly the Europeans during the era of new imperialism in the 19th century. So the African nomads are going to stay independent far longer than any other nomad group.